Hi, this is David Lombardo, and we're here with David Keene, who is the past president of the National Rifle Association. David, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Right now is kind of an interesting time because what's happened is the Democrats have taken over the House. And a lot of people in the shooting world think, well, it's not that big a deal because we've got the Senate, we have the president. But it is that big of a deal. It's Maxine Waters, really, isn't it?
Well, the House has already passed two anti-gun pieces of legislation. One would require what they call universal background checks, which would, for example, make it illegal for you to use my gun at a gun range because you like to try that one out.
Sure.
That would be a felony. And then they have passed a bill that would essentially negate the fact that if you go to purchase a firearm and there's some question about your right to purchase it, the FBI has 3 days to clear you. They've changed that ostensibly to 10 days, but it's actually much longer, and then you have to request to be cleared. So these are very, very restrictive gun laws that have passed the House. They won't pass the Senate, at least not before the 2020 election. If the Democrats win the Senate, that'll be different.
That'll be different.
But when you say the Democrats now control the House, it's not the Democrats you and I might think about. It's a new Democratic majority.
That's true.
What they call a progressive majority, a majority that actually believes, because of their belief that the next election is simply going to be a referendum on the incumbent president, that allows them to say whatever they want, do whatever they want without fear of political repercussions. So ordinarily you expect them, particularly after the lessons they've learned in the past, to be wary of the millions of gun owners out there who might vote against them for what they're doing. But they think they can get away with it this time.
Sure.
And so they are energizing their base. They can't pass actual bills, but they can bring pressure on private institutions to not deal with gun owners. This is happening in the Financial Services Committee in the House with Maxine Waters of California as the chairman. They're calling bank presidents up there and saying, why are you extending credit? Why are you processing checks? Why are you doing this? The best response came from the president of Wells Fargo, who said, we're not doing what you want because we don't think we should be in the business of attempting to execute laws that don't exist.
Well, and they did the very same thing some time ago, the last time around, and they successfully pressured a lot of banks.
Well, this they did administratively through what was called Operation Choke Point.
Right.
And the interesting difference in their attitudes today and then is that when it was revealed that they were doing this, they all denied it. The Obama administration said, no, we're not doing it. Now they're bragging about the fact that they want to do it, so that Representative Carolyn McCarthy of New York, before the committee, said we have to do what we can do to get banks and other institutions not to deal with gun dealers, gun manufacturers, and people interested in buying firearms. That's something they used to deny they were intending to do. Now they brag about the fact that they want to, and that tells you the different atmosphere that exists today in Washington as opposed to that existed even under the Obama administration.
Sure, and the Young Turks are really over on the edge. I mean, they're way out, to the point where even Pelosi is beginning to marginalize some of them. The other thing that's happening, though, that I think is really a major issue is social media. Social media is beginning to fall in line with all this. Facebook, for instance, oftentimes won't run ads that have anything to do with shooting. There's, I forget the name of it, that you sign up. I can't recall the name of it, but it's a public thing where you can sign. Eventbrite. It's Eventbrite. Mm-hmm. They're now not doing anything that pertains to firearms. Now, these are private companies, and this is kind of a pithy issue. Where is the line drawn that, yes, it's a private company, you can do what you want, but if you're the only one that has that product, then that makes you not really private.
It's a very touchy issue because you're right. Most Americans believe that private institutions should be able to do whatever they want. They clearly have a right not to carry some things and carry others. But when a private platform for communications essentially achieves monopoly position in the world, if they were a government utility, if they were a government platform, they couldn't do that under the Constitution of the United States. But they're doing, because they're private, they're doing what the government might like to do, and they're doing it not just because they agree with the so-called progressive majority of the Democratic Party, but because they're under pressure to do so. So this is going to be contentious for some time, and I don't know how it's going to be resolved, but the Republic cannot function if speech is fettered in the kind of ways that they're trying to fetter it.
And they certainly have been trying to do it. You remember they tried to do it with talk radio. They could not put up a liberal show that would get enough sponsorship that they could maintain it. So their answer to that was there has to be a requirement.
Right. The old fairness doctrine, as they called
Exactly.
it, which really stifled talk radio because it was a waste of resources and money, and it was only until the fairness doctrine was replaced by the marketplace that AM radio, for example, came back as a platform for talk radio and communication. And most of that was conservative talk radio because that's where the market was. Those are the people that wanted to listen to it. And because conservatives didn't have many outlets for communication. Now that's what's happening now on the social media, is conservatives are being cut out. And they're saying we're doing that to protect the public. That's what authoritarian governments always say when they say you can't speak because what you're talking about is dangerous to the public. You can't have a robust democratic system if you can't discuss public issues, do it in a reasonable manner, and do it widely and by as many people as possible. And they're trying to stop that so that just as on college campuses where they prevent conservatives from speaking out, where they don't hire conservatives, now it's spread to the social media where they're saying, well, the First Amendment, it's nice, but if it offends anybody,
right,
then we shouldn't allow the free speech. That's one of the great challenges this republic faces during the next decade.
So the big question now is 2020 is coming up. We already have presidential candidates lining up from the left. Any prognostication about the Senate, the House, and the presidency?
Well, again, if you go back, and this tells you the kind of mindset that now controls one of our major parties. The various presidential wannabes on the Democratic side have in large measure come out in the majority for doing away with the Electoral College, eliminating 2 senators per state. Those are really attempts to sort of disenfranchise the deplorables, as
Absolutely.
they would put it. They can't accomplish that because both of those things require a constitutional amendment. But the other thing that 5 presidential candidates have already endorsed is packing the Supreme Court, because that can be done if you control the presidency and you control the Senate and the House. By a simple majority vote, you can add justices. When Hugo Chavez took power in Venezuela, he enlarged his nation's Supreme Court to 32 people and put all of his buddies on.
Most of them were his relatives.
It didn't work out as well as he'd hoped for Venezuela. But in fact, they're now talking about, well, if we have a conservative court that, for example, interprets the Second Amendment to guarantee a personal right to keep and bear arms, all we need to do is increase it from 9 to 11, point to progressives, and we can reverse that decision and the others that might stand in our way. That's a real danger. But what it really tells you is the mindset of these folks. You had one presidential candidate, Beto O'Rourke, the Irish Hispanic, argue that the Constitution is sort of an outdated, archaic instrument. We ought to look at whether it's really up to governing a modern country. But you've had all of these folks say that the Constitution should be changed not for institutional reasons, but to accomplish their policy goals. And that's a danger.
And they're talking about lowering the voting age to
16. That's Nancy Pelosi's theory.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's really crazy. So I think the president is probably pretty safe.
Well, the problem with the presidency and the problem with the presidential race is that it's a little bit like the NFL. On any given Sunday, any team might beat the other team.
And that's true.
So when you have candidates as different, with as different visions as the candidates in 2020 are ultimately going to have, there's always a chance that one of them might beat the other for a whole variety of reasons. The economy could take a bad turn. One of the candidates might do something stupid or that's regarded as stupid. You remember Mike Dukakis destroyed himself with one ride in a tank.
Exactly.
All of those things are possible. So it's never safe to say the election's going to turn out the way one thinks it is. I've learned over the years that you should be really careful about predicting those kinds of things. But this is going to be a crucial election because if it turns out badly,
it's going to be really bad.
We're going to have wholesale changes in the institutional structure that have made this country the greatest country in the world.
David Keene with the National Rifle Association, past president, thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And for On Target Radio, I'm David Lombardo.